Still coming in. The first of those announcements is that tomorrow we will have Mrs. Woetzel will take the children up through the third grade. We don't have many fourth and fifth graders, so that will include Karen Strenkel's Sunday school class and my Sunday school class. She'll be, my wife's Sunday school class. She'll be taking those classes. And then during Children's Church, we'll have our Children's Church as normal up through the sixth grade. And Mrs. Woetzel will be taking those young people for the Children's Church time. Tonight afterwards, if we could enlist a little bit of help cleaning the building for tomorrow, vacuuming, picking up, and if you see something around your pew that's been left that's not supposed to be there, please grab it and clean up. But I need a couple of people to man a vacuum cleaner in the fellowship hall and the foyer, and we need to go over the bathrooms to make sure all that's prepared for tomorrow. That's all I have as far as announcements concerned. Brother Dave, it's your turn.
Well, good evening again. This is always the hardest session, you know that. Keep everybody awake after that great dinner. How many of you ladies help bring stuff for tonight? Wow, let's just give it up for these ladies. Wow, that was just, thank you so much. Appreciate each of you that helped bring munchies. Oh, man alive, I was supposed to lose weight here after getting out of Lancaster. Anybody been on a Sight and Sound? You guys been down to see David? We went down and saw David, but I'll tell you, my wife, she's all about the productions, and they were good. But man, for me, those Amish buffets, man, that cooking down there, wow. I'm like, okay, I got to go light all the way after this. Then I come here with a dinner like that. Man, you ladies, got some Amish up this way too, I think. But what a great dinner. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pastor Streckman, for just the opportunity to share my passion, my burden with you folks. This is just a joy for me. I just love to do this. I love to talk about my God, my great creator. And if you know of any other churches that could use a ministry like this, I tell pastors, God has met all my needs. Feel free to take a love offering if you want, but truly don't feel any obligation. God has met all my needs. And just a joy to be able to minister and to be able to share with you my passion for our great God and our great creator. Well, in this session, we're going to talk about the missing links in evolution. And I'm going to tell you up front that this is the most complicated presentation, which is really not smart to have after dinner, is it? But you guys are a really smart group, and you can hang with me. I have to have one kind of in-depth one just because sometimes I get the PhDs that'll come, you know, and the biologists and stuff. And so if you don't get it all, don't let it bother you. But I'll go just a little deeper after this. I promise we're going to get a lot more general and a lot more accessible. But the missing links in evolution, and sometimes people get the wrong idea. They think I'm talking about some kind of a hybrid type of a creature like this Kawasaki thing here, this redneck motorcycle. I'm really not talking about that. I'm talking about the problems in the chain of logic, the missing links in their theories. We ended our last session by talking about the two-model approach. The two-model approach. Somebody came to me in our dinner and said, hey, do you really think we should be teaching evolution? And in a perfect world, no, I don't think we should be teaching evolution. But the fact is that it's a very prominent view out there, and part of education is making people aware of what's going on out there. So even for homeschoolers or for Christian schoolers, I suggest we teach about evolution. It's kind of like why we may teach a course in Sunday school on cults. Not because we should have to teach that, but just to be aware and to be educated. So in the two-model approach, we have these very diametrically opposed viewpoints. And just to make it really kind of simple, I got 3 points on each side. On this left side, we see in the creation model origin by design. Origin by design. Over against that, we have it's all natural. All has to be explained by natural forces. Number 2, we see decreasing order. That is, God made things good, and at best they hold their own, or at worst, oftentimes they degenerate and go downhill. Over against this, on the evolutionary side, we have increasing order. Remember, we got to get from molecules to man. Now, we might go up and down a little in between, but somewhere along the way, you have to get increases in order. And then over on this side, we have catastrophic activities like the Genesis flood that carve out the landscape. And on this side, we have very slow and gradual processes that are much more uniform, just doing it over longer periods of time, over millions of years, see. And so we have these two very different models. And in this session, I want to talk about this first thing. Tomorrow in our worship service, we're going to talk about the second one, and then we're going to wrap it up tomorrow night by talking about this third one. So I want to particularly talk about origin by design versus natural origin. Now, our scriptural starting point tonight is going to be in 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3. And this is a prophecy of end times. I once had a debate with an evolutionist from Kentucky. He was a professor at the University of Kentucky. And I said, by the way, you occupy a very important part in fulfilled prophecy. Well, he got all upset about that. He didn't like that at all. But I said, here you are. You're in the Bible. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3, it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers. Scoffers walking after their own lust. So what's a scoffer? Somebody tell me. What's a scoffer? Someone who ridicules. There's another word with S that we use a lot of times today. I hear some murmuring. Scorner. Yeah, that would be a good one too. It's not the one I was thinking of, but that's a good one. Skeptic. Who said skeptic? Gold star for this young man. Do we have skeptics out there today? Oh, yeah. We got people that's their whole life is to be skeptical. Oh, I don't believe in that. Oh, I don't believe in that. We live in a postmodern age where it's all in vogue to tear everything down. Any kind of authority or tradition or structure, we want to tear it down. That's our whole purpose in life. Scoffers. But not only does Peter predict this coming of the great age of skepticism, but he predicts what they're going to say. He says these scoffers are going to come along saying, where is the promise of his coming? Where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Now, they're not creationists. That's the origin of the world is another way of phrasing that. Everything just continues on slowly, day after day, week after week, month after month, and the same kind of processes continue over great eons of time. What is that philosophy that they're espousing there? Does anybody know? What do we call that? Very slow, continuous processes that continue over great eons of time. Evolution is part of it, but it's broader even than evolution. Uniformitarianism, that is, the present is the key to the past. Things are uniform through time. And Lyle started this with his geology, his principles of geology, explaining, for example, he would look at a canyon, like the Grand Canyon, and say, now you might look at this Grand Canyon, you might think a tremendous catastrophe came through and carved this canyon out. But I look at this canyon and I say, no, that little Colorado River down there, over millions and millions and millions of years, over great eons, carved this canyon out. So we can explain things like geological formations gradually, but long periods of time, or we can explain them with shorter periods of time and more catastrophic activities. See? So this is the predictions of what they're going to say, and that's what they're saying. That's what my friend, this University of Kentucky professor, he's a geologist, that's what he was saying. Not only that, but the Bible tells us right in the chapter how to answer them. Folks, I'm telling you, the Bible is more up to date than tomorrow's Google headlines. Do you believe that? It is relevant to today, like never before. Of course, it's always been relevant, but it's just like never before we're seeing things in our time. It says that they are ignorant of two things, the watery conditions of the early earth and the Genesis flood. You see, we can explain the uniformitarians' arguments once we understand God's original creation, the early earth, which we'll talk about tomorrow, and the flood. It helps us understand and answer the questions, and we'll see that tomorrow. So here's our outline for this session. I want to give you the best arguments the evolutionists have. I'm truly going to give you the best shot. That's their best stuff, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to answer them. And then I want to talk briefly about biological complexity and mechanism challenges to evolution. Okay, here's the best arguments. 6 arguments. I'm sorry, it's not 6 arguments. This is 6 definitions of evolution. We'll get to their best arguments in a second. Here's what's interesting. You can't even find 2 evolutionists that can agree on a definition of evolution. There's lots of definitions. For example, there's cosmic evolution. evolution of matter and energy in the universe, or Big Bang. There's stellar evolution. How do the stars and planets form coming out of the Big Bang? There's chemical evolution. That is, how do we get complex molecules that can become the basis for a cell, cellular processes. And then once you've got this chemical evolution, how do you get that first life? How do they come together to form a cell? Organic evolution. And then macroevolution. Once you've got one kind of life, how do you develop whole new kinds of life? And then microevolution. That is variations within the different kinds themselves. Now, out of all these types of evolution they talk about, only one has ever been observed. What is that? Microevolution. I don't even like calling it evolution. I prefer to call it genetic variation. But they'll call it microevolution. So, okay. That's been observed. We got lots of different kinds of dogs, but it's still a dog. We got big dogs, little dogs, they're still dogs. We got lots of horses. We got big horses, little horses. Both creationists and evolutionists can agree they share a common ancestor, but they're still horses. Okay, so this is not evolution. It's not going to get you from molecules to man. So here are the primary arguments for evolution. Number one, biogeography. This one they've pretty much given up on. Sometimes you'll see it in a textbook, but I'm not going to spend any more time except to mention that sometimes they'll say, well, how come all the marsupials, these creatures that carry around their babies in their pouch, how come they're all in Australia? Well, we think the first marsupial evolved in Australia. But this has been pretty much given up on. But these others, the recapitulation theory of embryology, this idea that a baby, as it develops in its mother's womb, in embryology, it reenacts its evolutionary past. That you still see out there. The fossil record, okay, they talk about that a lot. This idea of marking design, Darwin's Riddles, we're going to talk about that. And finally, nested hierarchy. That is how organisms are classified and how they seem to fit together in a pattern. These are your main arguments for evolutionary theory. So let's go ahead and start with recapitulation. Now, you may have heard this if you went through a biology classroom, but it's this idea that an embryo, as it develops, reenacts its evolutionary history. Now, I've never had an evolutionist tell me why it should reenact its evolutionary history. They just say it does, and somehow that's evidence for evolution. For example, it's been completely discredited, but it's still in a number of school textbooks. The evidence in recent years suggests that the data supporting this idea of recapitulation was fraudulently altered by Ernst Haeckel. Remember, he was the leading light for evolution in Germany, that real racist guy. Okay, he came up with this idea of recapitulation. Darwin thought it was a great idea, and he put it in some later publishings of his book, Origin of the Species. And here is the actual picture that Ernst Haeckel produced. And Ernst Haeckel would say, look at this fish. It starts off and it eventually becomes a fish. Look at this salamander. Notice how similar it is to the fish, but then eventually it gets these legs and it's a salamander. Look at the tortoise and the chick and the hog and the calf and even the human. They all start off as this little fishy fellow. And that proves that once upon a time, we all were little fishies swimming in the ocean. And now the baby, as it develops, kind of relives its evolutionary history, and we all start off as fishies in our mommy's tummy. And eventually, oh, and by the way, these little slits here, look at those are like gill slits. Now, the baby never breathes through them because it's, it doesn't breathe in the womb, but yet it looks like gills, doesn't it? And so therefore, it gives evidence of our fishy past, and then eventually we become a human. Now, here's the problem. These wrinkles that are supposed to be gill slits, the baby never uses them for breathing. It's just a developmental stage. It's not evidence for evolution. Hey, if wrinkles are supposed to be evidence that you're coming from a fish, well, then some guys are getting ready to go back to being a fish when they're a little bit older. No, it's just a developmental stage, right? But the problems get worse for the evolutionists. Darwin considered this the strongest class of facts in favor of his theory. Haeckel called it the biogenetic law. But my friends, these pictures in these textbooks are a fraud. Haeckel altered the evidence. That is not what the embryos actually look like. It's fake drawings. And he did it to try to prove evolution by doctoring the evidence. And yet here it is in a 2013 textbook on from Columbia University, and it's still got these same fake drawings. Recapitulation theory of evolution is an embarrassment to the evolutionists. Okay, let's talk about the fossil record. The fossil record has extinct life forms, supposedly intermediate life forms, one kind evolving into another, and sequences of simple to complex. So this is supposed to be an argument for evolutionary theory. All right, let's talk about the fossils a little bit. I want to give you the big picture, the satellite view of the fossil record. When you zoom way out, it's characterized by a few very distinct things. One is abrupt appearance. Now, all the quotes I'm going to give you right now are quotes from leading evolutionists. No creationists, all leading evolutionists. This one is Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard University, leading evolutionist. He wrote the book called The Panda's Thumb, and it's a bestseller. In it, he says on page 189, all paleontologists know the fossil record contains precious little in the way of intermediate forms. Transitions between major groups are characteristically abrupt. Somebody translate that in everyday English. What is Stephen Jay Gould? What is Dr. Gould saying? Don't see any transitions, Pastor. Missing a lot of fossils. Oh, we just got to go out and find them. We got to keep digging. He's saying we don't see anything, we don't see anything, we don't see anything. Poof, we got a cat. Fully formed, saber-toothed, whatever it is, cat. We don't see anything, we don't see anything else, and poof, we got a dog, and it's a fully formed dog. We don't have this gradual evolution from something into a cat. Gradual evolution from something into a dog. Now, they can make up stories and draw fancy pictures, but we don't have the fossils. That's what Dr. Gould is saying. Now, there are some exceptions that they'll argue, but that's the big picture. Abrupt appearance. And the worst of it is a part of the geological record, the fossil record, called the Cambrian explosion. That is way, 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 way down in the lower layers that they say are 600 million years ago. Boom! Suddenly, you got all the major forms of life, poof, out of literally nothing, like as if they were created. And this causes them to have heartburn. They hate the Cambrian explosion. Here is Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard evolutionist. The fossil record caused Darwin more grief than joy. Nothing distressed him more than the Cambrian explosion, the coincident appearance of almost all complex organic designs. The fossil record, again, I tell you, is characterized by abrupt appearance. Here's Eugene Koonin, evolutionist, the Cambrian explosion in animal evolution, during which all diverse body plans appear to have emerged in a geological instant, is highly publicized enigma. Major transitions in biological evolution show the same pattern of sudden emergence of diverse forms at new level of complexity. Eugene Koonin, 2007. It's abrupt appearance, my friend. Secondly, big picture, satellite view, the fossil record is characterized by stasis. That is, once these forms appear, they stay pretty much the same or they'll go extinct. Here's Niles Eldridge. He is the professor of American history, curator of the American Museum of Natural History, a leading evolutionist. He writes, it's the simple, ineluctable truth that virtually all members of a biota remain basically stable with minor fluctuations throughout their duration. Somebody put that in English. What is he saying? Take a crack at it. Yeah, there's no change. I mean, big changes in morphology. No, that they stay the same kind. So they abruptly appear, they stay the same kind, they go extinct. So where's the evolution? Okay. Number 3, so abrupt appearance, stasis. Number 3, the fossil record is characterized by distinct gaps. Here's Ernst Mayr. He is one of the leading evolutionists of the 20th century. In his book, What Evolution Is, he says, given the fact of evolution, excuse me, he believes it to be a fact, one would expect fossils to document a gradual, steady change from ancestor form to descendants. But that's not what the paleontologist finds. Instead, he or she finds gaps in just about every phyletic series. Well, a phyletic is a lineage of ancestors to descendants, supposedly showing more primitive forms, evolving into a more complex form. And he's saying we got lots of gaps. That's a problem. That's a problem for the evolutionists. Again, that's the big picture. We got some exceptions we'll talk about, but that's the big picture. Now, that doesn't keep them from making up stories. It's easy to make up stories. Anytime you got a lot of anything, you can say, well, I think this thing is somewhere intermediate between these two. For example, let's say that the whole world did a reset, major nuclear war, and we're back to living as hunter-gatherers, and maybe after many, many, many years, we start digging down in the ground and we start finding these fossil machines. What are these things? I mean, at one point, these things must have lived on planet Earth. Look at these fossil machines. And so, Pastor Steckman is digging in his backyard, and he finds this thing called a fossil tractor. It even says John Deere on there. And I dig in my backyard, and I find this thing called a fossil locomotive. And I get this bright idea, and I say, Pastor, I think that thing you found evolved into this thing I found. Over millions of years, of course, right? And Pastor says, yeah, Dino Dave, you're crazy. And then I find the missing link. There it is. There's the missing link. It proves it. Right? Well, I mean, in size, it's somewhat intermediate between the tractor and the locomotive, but it's not like this happened first, then this, that. No, actually, this, and I mean, there's some things that seem like, but the tires, I mean, you got big tires, medium tires, small. I mean, some things don't line up real well, right? There's lots of ways of looking at this thing, but you can make an argument that evolved into that just by its size if you want to. Doesn't mean it happened. So you can make up stories all day long. It's all it is stories. I told you at the beginning of the night, I want you to get a good baloney detector. Observable, repeatable, scientific method. These are important concepts to keep in mind. Question. We have these rock layers, right? Limestone, shale, sandstone, conglomerate. How can you tell the difference between 100 million year old, say Jurassic limestone, maybe right there, and 600 million year old Cambrian limestone, let's say maybe right there? How do they decide? It's limestone. It's a piece of stone. It's a limestone. How do they decide, oh, this one's 100 million years old. This one's 600 million years old. How do they decide? Yes. Very good. Gold star for this. 2 gold stars for this guy. The fossils. The fossils that are in it. So in other words, you find a particular fossil that they think lived at a particular time and then went extinct. You find that in it. It proves that rock has to be that old because it's got that fossil. That's when it lived. So the primary way of dating the rock layers is what we call index fossils. That are fossils lived at a particular time and then went extinct. And if you find them in a rock layer, that rock has to be from that time period. Does that make sense? This long before radiometric dating came along. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But even still today, index fossils is the primary way. So for example, they taught for years that this lobe-finned fish here, this guy here, was from a time 325 million years ago. So if you found one of these things in a rock, they'd say, well, that rock is 300 million years old. Well, how do you know, Mr. Scientist? Because that there fishy fellow, he lived and went extinct about 300 million years ago. So if he's in that rock, the rock has to be 300 million years old. He's an index fossil. And then somebody that didn't know any better went and caught one of these things alive off the coast of South Africa. So now what does it mean if it's in a rock? Doesn't mean anything that could have happened 10 years ago that the thing got buried. You see how it's just a story. It's just a story. They're using that story of evolution to date the rock layers. But then it gets worse. They want to use these rock layers to prove evolution. This is something we call circular reasoning. You date the strata by the fossils, and then the fossils are dated by the strata. And they've admitted as much. This is an evolutionist, Tom Kemp. He says, a circular argument arises. Interpret the fossil record in terms of a particular theory of evolution. Well, inspect the interpretation. No, it confirms the theory. Well, it would, wouldn't it? You're arguing in circles. So there's problems, major problems with using the fossil record as evidence for evolution. Here's Oxford evolutionist Mark Ridley. Again, I'm quoting all evolutionists here. He says, in any case, no real evolutionist, whether gradualist or punctuationist, he's talking about different varieties of evolutionists, uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of evolution as opposed to special creation. Well, then thank you very much. He just gave up on it. So we're not going to even use it anymore. Well, a lot of them, of course, do, but he's given up on it. Now, we'll discuss radiometric dating tomorrow and evidence of rapid fossil formation. Don't have time tonight, but let's move on to number 4. Giving you the best evidences for evolution. This is called Darwin's Riddles. It was started by Darwin. He liked to ask these riddles. And for example, Darwin would say things like this. Why would an intelligent designer make odd and curious designs that seem to be poorly engineered? He talked about orchids. Darwin was an orchid fancier. He kept orchids, and he said there's some really just freaky concepts in orchid design. And there are. They seem to be very odd. Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard University, he wrote a book called The Panda's Thumb. And his whole point is that the panda does not have an opposable thumb. So you and I have an opposable thumb. If I'm going to pick up this candle here, I'm probably not going to use these 2 fingers and try to pinch it because, I mean, I got it there. It's pretty easy to pick up, especially because it came out of its case. But I don't get good grip this way. If I'm going to pick it up as a rule, I'm going to pick it up like this, right, with my thumb, because I can get a good grip on it. It's an opposable thumb. They oppose as opposed to just like pinching it, right? They actually work, the muscles work against each other. A panda does not have opposable thumb. It has a thumb that works like this. And so the question from Stephen Jay Gould is, hey, if God knew how to make a good thumb for people, why not give it to the panda? Why is the panda stuck with a bad thumb design? Now, it works perfectly good for the panda. You can use it for stripping off bamboo, and pandas survive fine. But it is kind of interesting. Why would God do that? Why would God make these odd or curious designs or designs that seem to be poorly engineered? And then Darwin would say this. Why would a creator employ different designs to accomplish the same task? Did you know octopus have eyeballs, but their eyeballs are designed very different from humans? Flies have eyeballs, but they're designed differently from humans and octopuses. Well, if you know how to make an eyeball, why not just use the same design for everything? God supposedly made these very weird. So why would that happen? Why would God do that? And then why are there evolutionary leftovers or vestigial organisms? Can somebody give me an example of a vestigial organ? I'm sorry, was that? Coccyx. Yes, okay, the tailbone. What's another one? Very common one. Appendix. Well, don't you know, Dino Dave, these are leftover from our evolutionary past. These are relics. So why would a good God make a leftover tailbone from when we were hanging in the trees unless we were hanging in the trees? So let's answer some of these Darwin's riddles. So Stephen Jay Gould, he talks about these things, and he says in his book, The Panda's Thumb, odd arrangements and funny solutions are the proof of evolution. Paths that a sensible God would never tread, but that a natural process constrained by history follows perforce. Now, here's what's interesting to me. The same arguments have been going around since the 1800s. They really haven't changed very much. And if you go back and read William Paley, who wrote the book Natural Theology, he actually answers this question. I've actually read this book, and it's not bedtime reading, I'll tell you, it's kind of deep. But here's William Paley back in the 1800s. He writes about the design argument, and he says on page 34, why resort to contrivance or making something odd and kind of curious when power is omnipotent? You have omnipotent power, why make something odd and weird like a panda's thumb? Here's his answer. It is only by the display of contrivance that the existence, the agency, the wisdom of the deity could be testified to his rational creatures. What's Paley saying? Let me illustrate. What's your name, young man? Daniel. Let's say Daniel and I are marooned on an island. We were out, whatever, on a boat, and our boat got driven by a storm, and we're stuck on an island. And we're getting sick of eating coconuts and bananas, and we're hoping someone's going to rescue us. And all of a sudden I say, hey, Daniel, look out there. there's a bottle that's floating out there in the surf. I mean, maybe that's a message from something. Man, you ought to swim out and get it. He's like, well, Dino, Dave, why don't you swim out and get it? Oh, okay, all right. So I swim out and get it, and we pop the cork. Poof, look at it. There's a piece of paper in there. Hey, Daniel, look at this. But we look at it, and it's just lines. Like, what's that? It's a barcode or something. I mean, that's nothing, right? But what if instead of it just being lines, it's a little squiggly this and a little curl with a dot and a little odd, curious little things? Now, we may not know what it is, but hey, Daniel, there may be a message there, right? It's talking to us. We can't decipher it. Maybe it's Egyptian hieroglyphics, or maybe it's Chinese, and I don't know Chinese pictographs, but there may be a message there, right? Why? Because it's curious, it's odd, there's little things, it's drawing our attention, it's communicating to us. And Paley is saying, hello, God's sending us a sign by making multiple eyeballs, by making these odd little designs in orchids and pandas' thumbs. God's trying to say something to us. He's trying to explain to us his creativity. Somebody asked me before, well, what about all these stars? I mean, is there aliens out there? Well, yeah, God could have made 5 stars and that would have been cool, but God's communicating his power and magnificence by making billions of stars just in our galaxy. It doesn't mean there's aliens, it's just God's showing us something. He's communicating a message to us. And that's what Paley is saying. God is showing us a message. So what about these vestigial organs? The coccyx, the tailbone. Don't you know, Dino Dave, way back when your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpapa was using that to swing in the trees. I like what the old fellow down south said. He said, some of my ancestors may have been swinging in the trees, but they were swinging from their neck, not their tail. Well, I've never quite understood this at all. Like, how is that supposed to be an evolutionary improvement to lose a tail? I fell out of a tree as a kid, climbing in one. I mean, if I would have had a tail, it might have saved my life. I mean, it'd be kind of cool to have a tail. You could close the door behind you as you're bringing in the groceries. You're playing piano. You could get some low notes down there with your tail while you're playing. Now I'm kind of having some fun with it, but what's supposed to be the evolutionary benefit of losing a tail? I mean, losing things is not like, that's not how you get from molecules to man, you know? We're losing stuff. But no, the coccyx actually has an important function. Try losing it. It can pulls muscles together. It anchors certain muscles. It allows us to be able to sit properly. So it has a purpose. Appendix is probably the number one, supposedly, evolutionary vestige. And there it is, this little finger-like thing here at the ending of our small intestine and the large intestine. Is this vestigial? Well, not so much. 2009, recent research by evolutionists has shown appendix has an important function as a safe house for helpful bacteria, so they can repopulate the intestine after diseases like dysentery. So look, it does have a purpose. I lost my appendix as a kid, but you know, maybe if I got dysentery, I might not do so well as some of you guys that have an appendix. It does have a purpose. So there are no true vestigial organs. Well, we got one more here, and that is nested hierarchy. In my opinion, this is their best argument. It's the best one they got. I've saved the best for last. That is, you can take organisms and put them into classification schemes. We can say all these things over here are reptiles, all these things over here are mammals, all those things over there are birds, all these things over here are amphibians, and they kind of fit in these neat little groups. Well, doesn't that mean that they kind of all had a common ancestor, and these guys all had a common ancestor, and those guys all had a common, and they're all more related to each other than they are to these guys? Why would God put things in groups? Why not just make a bunch of interesting organisms? What could be a purpose for that? So they argue that this is evidence of a common ancestor. For example, they like to argue about this pentadactyl limb. Pentadactyl is 5. This pentadactyl limb, 5 fingers. Well, a mole uses those same five fingers as basically a digging instrument. A monkey will use it as manipulation like we would. A bat will use those same exact 5 fingers to spread out its wing and fly. A dolphin has those same 5 fingers, a little long in the middle for the point, but he's using them for his flipper. All are mammals, and all have this same basic design. And so the evolutionists will say, well, there was an ancestor that had a 5-digit, and so therefore everything got stuck with 5 digits. Whether that was the best thing for a wing or a flipper is irrelevant. You got stuck with that because you came from your common ancestor. the argument has fallen on some tough times because now we've discovered they come from different genes. And genes is supposed to be the thing we actually inherited from our ancestor. You got to inherit the same genes, right? Well, no, they actually develop from different genes. So this kind of makes the whole thing on pretty shaky ground. But we do have this general classification, and Darwin would argue that's evidence of a common ancestor. He said, it's truly a wonderful fact that all animals and plants through all time and space should be related to each other. Now, he admitted there were these gaps in the fossil record, and those were a problem, but he did say things are all related. He says this, if my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed. And he said, well, give us time, we'll find them all. Well, we haven't found them all. The fossil record hasn't demonstrated them. And yet they still want to believe the thing. Now, follow me in this. Follow me. If in our fossils, we found some evidence of some very simple life forms that, okay, I can understand how those could evolve just from rocks and water. If in our fossil record, we could see gradual evolution from one kind diversifying into two totally different kinds of animals. If in the fossil record we could see clear transitional forms right at the point where things are dividing, that would be powerful evidence for evolution. That is not what we see. Again, I tell you, this would be difficult for us to deal with as creationists, to explain. Why is God doing that? That is not what we see. What we do see is a rarity of transitional forms. Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard University, rarity of transitional forms persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of the fossils. What's he saying? He's saying we have lots of cats and lots of dogs. We don't have the dats and the cogs. Now you can draw a tree. That's up to you. But we don't have the evolutionary intermediates to prove it. So here's an example of a tree you might find in a textbook. Well, what is that? Nobody can tell you. That's just the simplest form of life, whatever. But we don't have any evidence of it. Well, where is the in-between between this dinosaur and this fish? What are these things in here? Who knows? They're just drawing these things at the tips of the branches and saying, okay, well, obviously all these plants are more related to each other than these over here are related to each other. But that's just very general. Where are all these transitional forms? So my friend, follow me on this. You're a smart crowd. You can get this. This is the pattern of life. We see the reptiles all a little bit more closely bunched together than the amphibians and the mammals. But you can say that's because they shared a common ancestor, or you can say, no, the same pattern. The mammals have always been mammals, cats have always been cats, dogs have always been dogs, and it's just a tree. It's the exact same evidence. It's just how you interpret it. You want to draw a tree around it? You can draw a tree around it. But the evidence doesn't form a tree. The evidence is just kind of sitting out there. And it's how you interpret the evidence. Does that make sense? They're interpreting it as a tree. We could interpret it that it's always been that way. By the way, why did God do that? Why does God have all these categories of animals? I believe it's to show that there was one designer pulling it all together. This is 2009. Here's a quote from New Scientist magazine, Evolutionist. He says, for a long time, the Holy Grail was to build a tree of life, says Eric Baptiste, an evolutionary biologist at Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris, France. A few years ago, it looked as though the Grail was within reach. But today, the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. Many biologists now argue the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded. Wow. That's their best argument. And they're giving up on it. Here's a great book, Biotic Message. If you like some of these more technical arguments, he says the reason why things are built in these groups and form a pattern is to give evidence of a single designer, not a common ancestor. Well, what about some of the transitional forms that they do talk about? There's always a few exceptions that prove the rule. And when you say there's no transitional forms, they're going to differ with you. They say, oh, yes, there are. No, there's very few. Oh, let's talk about Archaeopteryx and Tiktaalik and the horse fossils and the whale intermediates. Why do you guys always talk about the same ones? All right, let's talk about the horse and the Tiktaalik and the Archaeopteryx. So these are the few exceptions. They talk about this Archaeopteryx. Well, what's he? It's a very weird bird. It's a bird with claws on his wings. It's got teeth in its beak. It's got a true tail, not just feathers, but a true tail, vertebrae that actually go down there. And this is an odd bird. But evolutionists have tried to say it's halfway between a dinosaur and a bird. But it's not. It's a bird. It's got true feathers, perching claws. It is a bird. Now, here's Alan Fiducia. He's a world authority on birds. He says paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur. It's not. It's a bird, a perching bird. And no amount of paleo babble is going to change that. So it's just an odd bird. 2009, Wellenhofer, the modern structure of the feathers of Archaeopteryx and their organization into a wing as an airfoil are typically bird-like. Evolutionists are so desperate to try to find an intermediate between dinosaurs and birds so they can say there's an evolutionary sequence that they got sucked in by a fake fossil from China. This made breaking news National Geographic, the Archaeoraptor. From the remote Liaoning province of China, an unusual dinosaur fossil made a mysterious journey through the hands of Chinese smugglers to the polished halls of National Geographic in Washington. It may be remembered as modern paleontology's greatest embarrassment. Turned out it was a fraud. Lead story, National Geographic. That's how desperate they are. My friends, we can make up stories all day long about one type of creature evolving into another. But long before you get a functional wing on a dinosaur, you're going to have half a wing that's not good for running or for flying, and it should be selected against because it's going to hinder you in the survival for existence. Well, what about this Tiktaalik? Half fish, half amphibian, walking fishapod. Many evolutionists think this is the best example of a missing link between amphibians or tetrapods and a fish. Well, it's an odd fish, but it is still a fish. Its limbs could not have borne the weight of walking. Its fins are clearly fish-like, and the very part that should be evolving into toes so it could walk, it's just not. It's a fish. We've got fish today, like this handfish that meander up onto land and back into the water. He's not evolving into anything or de-evolving into it. It's just a unique fish. And fossil trackways in Poland have been dated to 10 million years earlier than Tiktaalik by the evolutionists themselves. So if things are walking around 10 million years earlier, how can Tiktaalik be halfway fish and halfway an amphibian coming up on land? Stuff's already been walking around on land for 10 million years. So the problem. So it's a very poor transition. All right, how about the horse evolution? You see these in textbooks. This little thing, Eohippus, evolves into this thing here, which evolves into full-blown horses. Here's Niles Eldridge, evolutionist. He says these textbook pictures are lamentable. It's a classical case of paleontologic museology. They're musing things out of their brain, and they're drawing pictures of them. Turns out this is on the same level as this, and this is down lower. And no, these things they just don't fall into a sequence like that, like they want you to believe. Well, what about the whales? They see whales as mammals, and so they say, well, mammals, okay, all grew up on land, and so therefore the whale had an ancestor walking around, something like a cow maybe, or a bear, and it just happened to evolve back into the ocean, turn into a whale. Just imagine whales walking around. It's true. Why can they say stuff like this? Well, they see these little leg bones in the back of the whale, and they say, there, right on his edge of his vertebrae is a pelvis, evidence, a vestigial pelvis, evidence that he once was walking around on land like a cow when he fell in the water and he learned to be a whale and he's back in the ocean again and he's swimming around. Well, there's a problem with that. These are not vestigial. Vestigial means a leftover with no purpose. Evolutionary leftover. Well, in 2014, new whale research has turned a long-accepted evolutionary assumption on its hips. Instead of being just vestigial, whale pelvic bones play a key role in reproduction. According to a new study, no hip bones, no baby whales. We got a mixed crowd. We're going to be rather delicate about this, but just say that at certain important points in whale reproduction, the hips become necessary. But you don't have baby whales. It's not vestigial. It's very important. And God built it in there. And so Encyclopedia Britannica 2016, the evolutionary origin of whales remains controversial amongst zoologists. My friends, that's the best they got. Those handful of little things, that's the best intermediate. The big picture is abrupt appearance. stasis, extinction, lack of ancestors and descendants. That's the big picture of the fossil record. Doesn't keep them from making up stories. You can make up stories all day long. I'll give you a story. Did you know clouds are 99% H2O, 99% water? Watermelons are 92% H2O. Therefore, the cloud and the watermelon must share a common ancestor. Just a story. It's just a story. Here's Dr. Colin Patterson. He's senior paleontologist, British Museum of Natural History. He was asked why, in his book on evolution, he did not show any evolutionary transitions. He responded, I quote, "I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transition in my book. If I knew of any fossil living, I would certainly have included them. I'll lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil." This guy runs the British Museum of Natural History. They've got thousands of fossils in their archives. That's not one transitional form. None. Okay, everybody stand up, stretch. Stand up, get a breath of air, stretch to the sky. You guys have been doing real good. We're most of the way done here. Okay, thank you very much. Have a seat. We're going to get through this. I want to visit about biological complexity and mechanism challenges. This will be fairly quick. But this ends up being a huge problem for evolutionists. Big missing links. Enormous. I could put it all in caps. Enormous complexity in a single cell. In Darwin's day, they didn't know what was involved in a cell. They could think of it as a bag of goo. But today we know all these things, the Golgi apparatus and the nucleus and the cytoplasm, the centrioles, and all this wonderful, amazing, the ribosomes. And I mean, it's incredible complexity in the most simple, even single-celled bacterium. The DNA, like a code, all this complexity. How could this come from just rocks and water? Did you know if you were to take your DNA in one person, your chromosomes, and stretch them out, they go back and forth to the moon 100,000 times? That's the recipe to make a you. And yet it can all fit into a teaspoon. Now, what's the chance, just the DNA, what's the chance that this long DNA molecule, the critical cellular control kits, the DNA markers, the interacting RNA, the ribosomal machinery that can work with it, the precise enzymes that can make the copying possible, all these have to be there to even know what to do with the DNA. All these things have to evolve at once. Boom. What's the chance of all that coming together, all that machinery? It's ridiculously small. It's not going to happen. I mean, you can believe crazy things if you want. Well, I mean, you think just monkeys typing at computer consoles could put together all the works of Shakespeare just given enough time? Boop, 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 boop. No, they're going to make a mess of the place, right? Long before they get even a sentence that makes any sense. That's how natural forces do. They degenerate things. This is February 2011. I love this article. Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have any clue how life began. 1991, John Horgan, staff writer for Scientific American, wanted to write an article entitled, Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue how life began. But the editor would not accept the title. 2 decades later, the editor was gone. He used it in an updated article. The fact the situation has not changed after 20 years of intense research speaks volumes about the origin of life. The more we study the origin of life, my friends, the more surely we can say life did not come from rocks. It's ridiculous to believe life came from a rock. And yet you read things in textbooks like this. Time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible, probable. And the probable, virtually certain. One has only to wait, and time itself performs miracles. Whoa, there it is again. It's okay to have a miracle when we need it to get rocks to turn into life. It's okay to have a miracle to make the Big Bang create a fine-tuned universe. But we can't have the biblical miracles. Oh, no, that's not scientific. Go down to the religious studies department. Biological complexity. How could life come from rocks? An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many of the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. My friends, this is from an atheist. Here's another one. This is 2018. The transformation into primitive living cell capable of further evolution appears to require overcoming an information hurdle of super astronomical proportions, an event that could not have happened within the time frame of the Earth, except we believe as a miracle. Somebody says, well, haven't scientists produced life in the laboratory? No, not even close. What they've done is they've heated some water, they put it through some methane and ammonia and hydrogen, they've given it some sparks, and down here some red goo collects. Oh, what's in the red goo? Well, it's some complicated molecules, just stuff that gathered together, sediment, some of which is in life. But my friends, even if you took life and you put it in this environment, boiling water, hydrogen and methane and ammonia and sparks, what are you going to do to it? You're going to kill it. There's no way that could make life, even if you had all that stuff in the early Earth somehow. And even if all you needed was just the raw molecules, that's it, and suddenly they could come together. Well, then you could take a fish or a frog and put them in a blender. You got all the molecules you need to make a frog right there. After you grind them up real good, is it going to come back together again? No. How about if you give it 1,000,000 years? No. How about 1,000,000,000 years? No. Yet you read things in textbooks like this. This was Darwin's warm little pond, the famous prebiotic soup. The prebiotic soup would contain organic building blocks dissolved in water. Well, that's all we need is building blocks, right? Here's ecology or zoology textbook. The early organic molecules accumulated in primitive oceans in this hot dilute soup. You keep hearing this soup over and over again, this primordial broth with all these goodies in it. Here's an ecology textbook, 2014. Recently, it's been suggested that hydrothermal vents are a potential site for the origin of life. Vent water may be the ultimate soup in the sorcerer's kettle. I hear soup, 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 soup. I'm waiting for Campbell's to come out with primordial soup, and there will be your grandfather right in the can, right there. Oh, I shouldn't be making fun of it. I can't help myself. My friends, when you think about life coming from rocks, we have something in science called the Law of Biogenesis. You may remember hearing about this. Louis Pasteur, who was a Christian, by the way, disproved this idea that life can come from non-life, that you just take broth and all by itself it can just generate mold. No, he said it was particles in the air, and he established a process of pasteurization that we still use with milk and cheese stuff today, and established no, life only comes from life. It's a law because there are no known exceptions. So how are you going to get the first life forms when we have a law that says only life creates life? So if we got the law of biogenesis, that pretty much kills the Darwinian story of goo to you via the zoo. It's dead in the water, because you need a creator to get it started. And if you got a creator, well, he could make ducks and animals and dinosaurs and people and all that stuff. We don't need to have evolution at all. Darwin said this: to suppose the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. I mean, we've been talking about a single cell. Did you know your eyeball has, in less than 2 square inches, 100 million light-sensitive receptor cells? And you mean all that stuff's going to happen to come along in just the right order, in just the right place that you can actually see so that it can give you a benefit and then be selected for? I don't have the faith to believe stuff like that. Psalm 139:14, I'll praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God has put us together like a Swiss watch with all these pieces. And one of the better ways to illustrate this is with a mousetrap. Now, I'm going to set this mousetrap, and don't try this at home, because I'm a highly trained scientist, and this is a very complex, a complex and dangerous device. I'm highly trained in this. So I'm going to set this mousetrap without hopefully taking a finger off. Okay, now don't be worried. I got this totally under control. Here's a mousetrap. And there are these 5 pieces: the hammer, the catch, the bait, the base, the holding bar, and the spring. Question: if I randomly removed one of these 5 pieces, how many mice would I catch? Why none? Why wouldn't I catch maybe 4/5 as many mice? Huh? You need them all, right? Or It doesn't work, right? Now think about that for a minute. This is a simple little machine with these 6 pieces. A mousetrap. And yet, if you got one piece missing, you catch 0 mice because it doesn't work. In order for there to be a benefit, for it to survive and have a survival advantage, you got to have all of it at once. Now, we're talking about something as simple as a mousetrap. Think of the complexity of a human eyeball. Michael Behe, who lives right here locally, wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. He introduced this concept of the mousetrap, and he then applied it to something called the bacteria flagellum. Maybe some of you heard of this. The bacteria flagellum is like a tail on the back of the bacteria, and it kind of twirls around and it drives the bacteria through water, much the way an outboard engine would drive a boat through the water. This motor is so tiny that 8 million of them could fit across a human hair. It's a tiny, beautiful, incredible molecular motor. And yet we look at this under a microscope and we see it and we say, oh, I know what all those parts are. There's the hook, there's the bearing, the outer membrane, the inner membrane, the rotor, the stator. We know because we design outboard engines. Can you imagine the first guy and he's looking through his microscope and he says, hey, Charlie, I got an outboard engine in my microscope here. I mean, whoa! And we can't make outboard engines like this. This thing runs at 100,000 RPMs. Somebody that knows cars, what would happen if I were to take my car up to 100,000 RPM? Meltdown, right? Jet engines run at 100,000 RPM. But this thing can stop in a quarter of a turn and reverse direction. Try doing that with a jet engine while it's flying. You see, we can't make engines this good. And God made this tiny little microscopic engine with 40 proteins, not 6 like a mousetrap, but 40 proteins that all have to be in the right place at the right time, or that bacteria is dead in the water. Now, folks, we're making some progress because this is 2017. It's a science journal, and here he says this. Now, he uses science speak, so bear with me, but he says the bacteria flagellum exemplifies a system where even small deviations from the highly regulated flagellar assembly process can abolish motility and cause negative physiological outcomes. What did he just say? Somebody put that in English for us. Yes. Yeah, it's got to all be there. It don't work. Why couldn't he just say that? Well, he probably wouldn't be a great scientist if he just said that, right? We're making some progress. They're recognizing biological complexity is a massive barrier to evolution. One more quick thought and we'll wrap it up. Mechanism challenges. Promise this will be quick. Natural selection makes a nice story, but does not create anything new. It's like quality control in a factory. It just weeds out the mistakes. Yes, some things survive better than others. Mostly it's the mutations that cause massive monsters that get weeded out in the struggle for existence. Oh, there might be small variations where a white mouse or a white bunny rabbit or a white whatever might survive better in an Arctic environment, but we're just minor variations. You can't tell me that every single existence there's a struggle in and that the better and more fit survives. No, sometimes it's just the lucky stuff that survives. Oops. I don't know what I just did with that. Okay, here we go. Sometimes it's not survival of the fittest. It's the luckiest things. You can't tell me that this one here is better fit than this one. It's the survival of the luckiest, and God's word says as much. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle of the strong, nor yet favor to the man of skill. Time and chance happens to them all. And then natural selection, if it was up to the job, cannot document mutations that add new information to the genome. How do we get from molecules to man without adding lots and lots and lots of information? And yet every time there's a mutation, it destroys information. Yes, mutations make things like 2-headed turtles and fruit flies that have 3 wings or 4 wings and stuff that is weird like this. But mutations are accidents. You can't build whole complicated systems by just accidents. You don't build, computer codes just by randomly putting 1s and 0s in there. Oh, look what came out, a great new computer program. Here's Werner Gitten. He is the director of the German Federal Institute of Physics. He says information only arises through an intentional volitional act. There's no natural law through which matter can give rise to information. Neither is there any physical process or material phenomenon known that can do this. So you've got biological systems by accident? It just does not make sense. Here's Shapiro. He's an evolutionist. 2011, as many biologists have argued since the 19th century, random changes would overwhelmingly tend to degrade intricately organized systems rather than adapt them to new functions. So we've got major problems with biological complexity, major problems with the mechanism of natural selection. I want to wrap things up by going back to 2 Peter chapter 3. Not only does 2 Peter 3 prophesy the end times and what the skeptics will say and how to answer them, but also gives us their motivation. Why are they motivated to hang on to evolution when the evidence just keeps stacking up more and more against them? I'll tell you why. Because as soon as you acknowledge creation, you got another problem. You got an accountability problem. And the Bible says the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with a fervent heat, and the earth shall be burned up. My friends, if God created this world, he's in charge. Just like you or I might create a machine to do a particular function, and if it doesn't do the function, we might try to tweak with it, get it to work right, and if it still doesn't do the function, we may try maybe a couple more times, and eventually we're going to say, you know what, this isn't working, take it, throw it in the garbage can. And we have the authority to do that because we built the machine. And if God created this world, he has the right to judge it. And people don't like the implications of that. But I can tell you, it's the reality. It's the reality. Or you can put your head in the sand and say, I don't want to believe it. Well, that's your choice. But the reality doesn't change. Jesus is coming again to judge this earth. And even if you don't live to see that, you go from this earth to give an account to your Creator. If you died today, where would you go? There's only two choices according to the Bible. One is to live with God, and the other is to be judged by God to a place called hell. The Bible says it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. Are you ready for that? Just like the Bible's right when it talks about God creating the earth and all the order and the complexity, the evidence for design is pretty compelling. So the Bible's right when it says that we've got an appointment with our Creator. Are you ready for your appointment? If not, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. It'd be the most important conversation we could have. I'd love to talk to you, talk to pastor, talk to maybe someone who brought you. Settle the matter today of your eternal destiny so that you can know Jesus Christ, not just as Creator, but as Savior in a personal relationship. Pastor.
Amen. It is very important that we take all these truths and recognize that they lead to one common thread, that there is a Creator, and we will one day stand before Him. And when you read the statements of those who think they have a better way, they look a little confused, don't they? They look like do circular reasoning a whole lot and can't agree with each other. Brother Dave shared the verse that I was thinking of. It's in his presentation, Psalm 139, verse 14. I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. So there's a hint already of the consciousness that Romans chapter 1 speaks of. My soul knows it. It's within me. I realize there's a Creator. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I trust that you'll be back tomorrow morning. If you can use a little bit of help, if you can stay for a few moments here to help clean things up, be greatly appreciated. Let's go ahead and stand and close with a word of prayer. Lord, I ask that you would use these sessions to give us a greater stability, a strength from youngest to oldest, on the truths of creation and our great Creator who holds us accountable and responsible for the revelation that you have given to us, the revelation of your word and the revelation that comes through the scientific process of observation and, Lord, experimentation, and realizing that these laws of science, these matters that have been tested and tried, all point to a wonderful Creator. Lord, we ask that you would keep us safe as we travel, and bring us back tomorrow morning. May our hearts be encouraged as we consider some more of these topics. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Good night. Lord bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.